We have a good amount of people coming in so far. I say we get things started here. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you're having a good day so far. Really appreciate you being here for the MindShift webinar series hosted by O3 and our partner Foresight Digital. For those that don't know us well yet, O3 is a customer experience consulting firm that helps brands figure out what matters most to their customers. We work with organizations like Vertex, La Colombe, and Children's Hospital of Philadelphia to create authentic experiences that have a positive impact on people's lives. Pri, you want to tell us a little bit about Foresight Digital and what you guys do there?
Yeah, of course. So to give a quick intro, we're a marketing agency that develops and delivers strategy across paid and owned channels. We specialize in a lot of different areas, but mainly search engine optimization, site migration, paid search, analytics, and conversion rate optimization. Our team's primary objective really is delivering on the metrics which matter most to our clients. So that's making sure that all of our clients have continued brand growth and longevity over the many years to come.
Awesome. Thanks, Pri. So today we'll be exploring some best practices for how to maximize relevant inbound traffic once it hits your site, talking about SEO, personalization. But before we dive in today, I wanted to just cover a couple things before we get started. So first, we are recording this session and I will be sharing the live recording link with you all later this week. Next, we ask that throughout the conversation, if you have any burning questions that come up and you really want one of our panelists here to answer one of those questions, just feel free to use the Q&A feature within Zoom. And if you see another question come in that you really like and want to know the answer to, you could use that thumbs up icon to upvote that question. So we make sure we prioritize things as we're getting to the questions at the end of the session. Lastly, if you could just take this quick poll, it'll help us understand what angle you're coming at this conversation from, so we could really just understand where to take the conversation today. So really wanting to know, is your team still learning personalization best practices? Are you getting your personalization program started? Is personalization something that you strive for, but it's still a work in progress? Or is it really one of those like core values at your organization and it shows in your work? So while you're all taking that poll, I'm going to introduce today's moderator, Priyanka Gonder. Pri here has over 7 years of experience in digital publishing and media industries. She's worked both in-house and in agency environments to drive organic search initiatives from a technical, content, and UX perspective. Pri's also worked with a variety of local publishers and has led organic search strategies across a number of global brands. Pretty impressive list here, including Volvo, IKEA, Coca-Cola, IBM, and Dyson. As SEO lead at Foresight, Pri helps clients understand the importance and the evolving nature of search engine optimization. She's also known to help clients enhance discoverability and increase customer engagement on-site and off-site through owned media channels. So thanks so much, Pri, for being with us here today. We're really excited for this conversation. Before I hand things over to you, why don't I close this poll and share the results with everyone? So it's in this. It looks like a lot of people are working on personalization, but it's still a work in progress. So that's good. Great. So I'll hand things over to you, Pri.
Amazing. Thanks, Carol. So I am actually very, very, very excited to actually be moderating this panel today with our two amazing panelists. I will go through a bit of detail about each of them, but I know I will hand it over to them because nobody can say it better than each of these brilliant ladies. So without further ado, I'd like to present our two brilliant panelists who are driving insane results across both SEO and the personalization space. So first, our first panelist who you just saw waving was Dana Tan, who has over 16 years experience in the e-commerce space and is currently spearheading the organic search efforts for Under Armour as a senior manager for global SEO. Joining Dana today is Afshaan Mazagonwalla, who is a full stack machine learning engineer and has worked across a plethora of industries and is currently paving Hulu's personalization and content journey. Now, ladies, I am going to hand it over to you guys to give a bit of an intro for our audience around your current day-to-day, as well as a bit of background and what each of your roles are looking like. I feel like a lot of people, especially from the poll results, aren't fully aware or fully integrated with the personalization or the SEO journey. So I think that would be amazing. Let's start with you, Afshaan, if we could.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Priyanka. So yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm currently working as a data scientist on the content and product data science team at Hulu, which is owned by the larger Walt Disney company, which means that we get to work across a number of organizations like Disney Plus, ESPN, Star Plus, and Hulu, and to try to identify where data science can be used to improve the entire customer journey. Some of my core competency or my experience has focused around the area of email marketing. How can we decide a marketing strategy over an over a free channel like email, which is different from paid media? How can we optimize how many messages we send, what content goes out in those messages, and to be able to identify the right audiences for the right interventions. So this is my experience. This was also my experience at Wayfair, where I worked previously. Wayfair is an e-commerce giant where we're trying to convince customers to buy furniture online, and we're also, faced with a unique challenge of having to convince style-sensitive customers to really connect with the product without really being able to see it in a physical store or physical space. So my entire career has been focused on leveraging the power of machine learning and data science to make these kinds of purchase decisions easier, with a strong focus on really connecting the right audiences with the right piece of content.
That's amazing. I love that you touched on the e-com industry as well, just because we do have a lot of attendees today who are actually from that industry. So that would be very relevant for them. Dana, if you could kick it off.
Thing. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Pri. Thanks for having me. Hi, Afshaan. Hi again. We talked last week, and I'm delighted to be here. It looks like, did you lose my video? Hold on. Let's see if we can fix that. We are having thunderstorms here, and my internet has been going in and out all day, so maybe that's what happened. Let's see if we can. It was working until I started talking. I am just going to keep talking and we'll try to get it sorted out. I have been at Under Armour for 3 years now. I am onboarding a team right now that I worked very hard to advocate for the last 3 years. So I'm super excited to have these people joining me. I was hired in a global capacity. Right now, I'm focusing on North America. And e-com is my wheelhouse. I've been doing SEO well over 16 years. I skew towards the technical side of SEO. That's really my area of love in the industry, and it's where I've spent most of my time, whether it was in-house or agency side. And I'm thrilled to be here today and have a great chat.
Amazing. Well, we can hear you perfectly, so no problem about your video. But if it comes
I'm just going to keep trying.
That's all good, Dana. I guess if we continue on, I think because you both have been in the industry for such a long time as well and worked across different brands and different types of challenges in each of your respective fields, where do you think the most change has happened, or how has it evolved over time, I guess? And what are the main stumbling blocks you've sort of seen over the years, or what has actually helped drive and push personalization or SEO within the industries that you worked in? I guess, Dana, we'll start with you this time.
Sure thing. Yeah, I think that SEO's changed a lot since I first started. When I first started, I was a broad-based digital marketer, so I did everything. I did paid search. I actually was hired to do email campaigns in my very first digital job. And I was doing SEO on the side, and I was doing some brand marketing, wearing a lot of hats at a small company. And then as the industry matured, all of these areas became very specialized. And now I could never hope to be in email marketing. I would have a lot to learn if I went back to email marketing at this point. Same with paid search, this will date me a little bit, but when I started in the industry, I was doing paid search on a little platform called Overture, which which then became AdSense, which then became Google Ads. They bought Overture, and that became Google paid search. So that was way back in the day. And I think that these areas, even SEO itself, has become specialized now, right? So you've got content SEO, you have link building, you have the technical side of SEO, and really there are very specialists within each of those. So I think that it's changed a lot. It's maturing. I'm seeing VP level of SEO postings for jobs now. I never thought I would see that in my wildest dreams. So it's really growing up as an industry. I think digital in general is that way for sure.
Amazing. Afshaan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Diana has a huge wealth of experience. I've only been in the industry a few years now, but I will say that machine learning for personalization is a very, very active area of research, and we have to keep we have to keep up with the trends that show up in consumer products. So for instance, TikTok was a big boom, right? And you can see how consumers have changed the ways in which they consume content, which means that the channels we choose to advertise on, or the channels we choose to get our leads from, are constantly evolving. And I think on the personalization side, that has led to us trying to build more near real-time personalization systems, right? So we went from a regime where we would say collect data in order to do personalization, and build models that had a daily cadence, right? So if I know your preferences as of yesterday, it's totally fine. But right now we're moving to this like high speed regime where, every click that you take, we have to be responsive enough to continue to personalize your experience on the basis of that. And that really opens up a huge opportunity for engineering efforts, for really being able to build these kinds of like faster responsive systems. And I do think it has an impact on the entire customer experience.
Amazing. From somebody who's actually based in Australia, the one thing that I notice when both you and Dana talk about clients is that Australia, we have a lot of clients who are afraid of the personalization, as well as more in-depth SEO strategies as well. So I think for me, that's why I was equally as excited just to be moderating this panel, to hear all the different perspectives and how everyone's actually moving that journey along for different brands. But I think one interesting thing that you mentioned, Afshaan, was around, the different ways things are done and how there could be potential roadblocks. So I guess when we put both of those things together, Dana or Afshaan, whichever one wants to start, where do you think there are potential pitfalls from an SEO perspective as far as personalization goes? I know, Dana, you work with the personalization team, but I guess Afshaan, from the other side, if you have any perspective working with your internal teams as well.
I think Dana raised a very important point earlier when we spoke around how sometimes putting up personalized pages can interfere with the SEO or the entire ranking of your website. So for instance, if you create multiple personalized experiences, it sort of cannibalizes your SEO strategy, right? So in a lot of things that we do in personalization, we have to be careful that our strategies don't affect the other strategies we have in place. So that is something I'm usually mindful of.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think part of the challenge is, for example, I'll give you a real case scenario. We recently had an email campaign that a landing page was created for, that was very specific to that email campaign and that experience, right? And the idea was well, maybe we can dual purpose this page, right? And in this particular case, it wasn't really going to work because the context of the journey that that customer had been on, for someone who arrived at that page via organic search with none of that existing journey, would get to the page and they wouldn't really know what to do, right? Whereas the people coming from the email campaign were on this path that they knew, oh, it was a very logical progression for them, but became a disjointed journey when you just jumped into the middle of it like that. And so I think there are times when you can dual purpose a page, and maybe a landing page for either a paid search campaign or an email campaign might be able to be used for organic search in some way, but it's tricky, right? I think you not only need to think about where is this person coming from and what has their experience been up till now, but then, what sorts of questions is this page going to answer if someone just ends up there out of the blue, right? Is it going to satisfy the question that they asked in Google search, for example? So it can be challenging. And to Afshaan's point, it's like you want, maybe you have one journey for kids, and maybe you have another experience for parents of kids, right? And if those, if the content is very similar, then, and you've also got an organic page that has very similar content, then you've got some decisions to make about which one is the one you want to show people in organic search, right? So I think SEO needs to be aware of what types of personalized pages or URLs are being created that are going to be exposed potentially in a Google search result, right? So that they can avoid like cannibalization, like Afshaan said. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. Oh, that's great. I guess, Afshaan, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to, where we work well together. So SEO clearly, deals with organic search, but depending on the scale of the company, you might want to invest some of your resources on paid search. And in the past, I have worked very closely with paid search teams where we're able to use machine learning models to be able to prioritize what keywords we want to show to what personalized pages, right? So for instance, like fluffy red couch goes to a particular page relative to like modern leather couch. And so it's really about investing, how much you're willing to invest in paid search and being able to identify what kind of differentiated experience you want this keyword to have on your website. Yeah, I think that should be a good starting point if anyone's starting to think about that.
It's definitely some great advice, but I think like going back to the poll again, I guess a lot of people are still very early on in their journey of both their personalization and SEO journey. I think if we separate both of those two, I guess if you had 2 key tips to give our audience members, keep in mind that we have a lot of people who are in financial services as well as higher education and e-com industries joining us today. Would you have like 2 key tips where in the SEO space you need them to watch out for? Could be potential pitfalls, as well as for you, Afshaan, for the personalization journey. Where do you see most brands fail when it comes to actually implementing those journeys and making sure they get it right? I'm happy for either of you to jump in, but since you're not on mute, Afshaan, you can definitely kickstart.
Right. I think when you're just starting out your personalization efforts, it's always easier to start small. So I believe a lot of brands are familiar with the concept of A/B testing, right? Where you have intervention A and intervention B. So you don't have to create multiple interventions, but you really want to start giving a differentiated experience to your customers and let those interventions be handcrafted at first if required, but you really want to go through a rigorous experimentation process to decide what your top contenders are going to be. Right, that's my first recommendation. My second recommendation is going to be that you've got to own the logging on your own website. So you can't do personalization unless you have information about your customers. And then, so there are different levels of information that you can have about a customer. So before you start thinking about like external sources of information, say Nielsen data or, buying third party information, you really want to own how customers are interacting on your own website, right? And so for that, you've got to like really build out the infrastructure to track and log all of the ways in which they interact with your own product. And so that's going to give you a lot of insights onto what kind of user journeys they're taking, what kind of hubs are getting the most traffic. Are there clusters of users that are interacting differently with your product? And how would you provide a different experience for them? So customer segmentation, I think, is a very important work stream to focus on, and also focus on as much in-house data as you possibly can.
Dana, I saw you get off mute.
That's great. Yeah, I think the two things I would just have teams be aware of when working with personalization teams is understanding, being connected with them, right? Just collaboration, understanding what they're working on. A lot of times there's A/B testing involved, and I think it's really important to loop in your SEO partners when you're A/B testing, especially if you're playing with URLs or parameters. Google's very specific about how to handle that in best practices. And what you really don't want to have happen, of course, is to have both your A/B versions both indexed in Google at the same time, or multiples if you've got more than two versions, right? Because not only is it confusing from a ranking perspective for SEO, but potentially really bad experience for people who end up on one version versus another, or share one version versus another in social media. So that I think that there are guidelines. I would encourage you to look up Google guidelines for testing and make sure you're looping in the SEO team for those instances. Really important. It gets forgotten a lot, believe it or not. Yeah.
I've definitely experienced that, Dana. Yeah, especially with migrations and all of those things. There's always one team that's not always looped in sometimes, and then you have lots of problems on the website, which could have been easily avoided.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I guess I think the last thing, and I have a few more points that I do want to touch on, but I guess, are there ever times where you've seen personally where it makes sense not to personalize an experience? And if you have any examples that you could share with the audience as well.
I'll jump in there for sure, because that's our realm, right? We SEOs, we play in the non-personalized experience space. Really, when you're talking about optimizing for SEO, you're talking about first-time logged out users, because that's how a search engine is going to experience your site always, or they should. Because search engines can't log in, right, to anything, and they're always acting like a first-time visitor, so they don't have any personalized data. And you need to optimize for that person in addition to all the people that you have data on, right? Because those are going to be your new customers, which is that acquisition piece is very important. So I think the logged out first time experience, a lot of times, a lot of big brands forget about that, right? They get so caught up in about what someone's experience is once they're already on the site, or once they've already purchased, or once they've already logged in. Not that those aren't important, because keeping those people happy is really important, but you have to get them there in the first place, right? Which is really SEO's job, or paid searches, the acquisition channels, right? We're about getting the traffic there in the first place. And then you start, figuring out who they are and customizing their experience. So I think that first time logged out user, what is that experience going to look like, right? And approach it with the same rigor and interest that you approach a personalized journey, right? I think it's super important.
No, that's great. Afshaan, do you have any comments on that one, or do you want me to go on to the next question, which sort of wraps up everything that we've talked about?
I think Dana's point is super valuable, right? You do have to get customers on the site, right? And that's a huge aspect of traffic generation. I'm obviously biased towards working in regimes where there is a lot of data available, and then your main challenge is how do you make sense of this data? How do you provide a differentiated experience? But in the event that you don't have data, right, then you have to be very mindful that if you're seeing some very small differences in user behavior, if you're seeing small differences that are not statistically significant, it might not make sense to build out two different, interventions. So just to be very mindful that even if something's looking like it's winning, you want to have like a rigorous assessment of how significant those results were.
Yeah, that made me think of something. I think that's a really good point. And I think sometimes just because you can doesn't mean you should. We talked about this when we were prepping for this call today. In one of the first problems that I saw when I came to Under Armour 3 years ago, and Under Armour isn't the only company that has tried to handle things this way, so it's not unusual to see this. But we have websites all around the world in like 28 different countries, and when I came to Under Armour, they had set up sort of a user agent sniffer, if you will, to determine if a user, say, was in Germany and they typed in underarmour.com in their address bar, they would be redirected based on their IP location to the Under Armour German site, even if they were an American English speaker, but they happened to be in Germany, right? And so one of the things we had to fix was sort of communicate if they're so specific as to go to their address bar and type in a domain per verbatim, right? That's where they want to go. that's they're expecting to go there, and under no circumstances should they be taken somewhere else. Now, what you can do is you can serve a pop-up that says, hey, do you really want to go to Under Armour Germany, or are you really wanting to go to the United States site? And I think that's probably a more appropriate way to make sure that someone is getting to where they really intended to be, rather than forcing them, right? So if you lived if you lived in Germany, but you were an American US English speaker, it didn't matter what you did, you were going to be forced to go to the German site because your IP address was in Germany. So I think that's where an attempt at anticipating what you think someone wants can go astray, right? So I think that's where yes, you have that data, but maybe you shouldn't do anything with it quite yet. And in those scenarios. So I think I've seen that problem at multiple other companies. So it's not unusual for sure.
Yeah, I feel like I do have another wartime story to share. So there are situations where that works, right? So for instance, if we're trying to sell furniture on Wayfair, we'll try to identify, okay, do we want to market gazebos in New England during the winter, or are we going to send that to Florida and Tampa and so on? So we will provide a different kind of furniture or a different kind of marketing product placement to different geographical regions, right? And there are times when that works. There are times when that really affects the bottom line, because if I was sitting in New England and it's freezing out, I'm not thinking of building a gazebo. So you're wasting valuable impressions dollars. And it's really important to sort of also streamline your efforts. And you have a certain amount of marketing spend, you want to be efficient in that channel. That's why we come up with these things. But if you get it wrong, it's going to have repercussions on your brand image, right? Like Dana mentioned, it's going to frustrate customers. And if you do assume what subscribers want, what customers want, it could lead to a PR nightmare. So tread with caution. That's all I'll say.
That actually leads on really well, Afshaan, with, I guess, what sort of wraps up everything we've sort of spoken about. So we're talking about we've spoken about the pitfalls, we've spoken about what people should be mindful of, what are the do's and don'ts of both personalization and SEO. I guess the main thing where I've personally seen a lot of brands stumble on actually getting things across the line, whether it's a new SEO strategy or whether it's actually trying A/B testing, is actually how you convince other stakeholders within a company to actually sign on and get on board. So I think it'd be really beneficial if you both have any trusted tips or techniques that you use to sort of get things across the line and sort of show the value of each of your respective fields.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there. Especially since I'm onboarding 3 people, so obviously we made the case to build a team, right? Which is in any scenario on any team, that's a high bar to meet usually in an organization. I think you have to be prepared to prove your value always, because if you don't, the guy sitting next to you on the other team is going to be able to do it, and they're going to get budget and resources. So the more data and the more compelling that data is, the better off, right? And then you have to be able to communicate what that data means to an executive who may not know anything about SEO and why it matters, right? So I think the ability to not only have a lot of data at your disposal, but a very keen sense of how to communicate how that data proves value for the business, and whatever you're proposing, whether it's additional team members or a project, what that's going to do for the bottom line, whether it's revenue or building a list or app downloads or whatever that might be. You need to communicate what the value is going to be as a result of your efforts, and that's hard, right? It's not easy to do. And I think that the more often you can sort of bounce ideas off other people in the industry, opportunities like this, to talk about what other teams are doing, is a great way to hone those skills for sure.
I think those are excellent tips and definitely things that I've seen work. I think data is probably the most important thing. I feel like a lot of companies often neglect the data that they do have. And Afshaan, to your point earlier, you did mention that there's a lot of internal data that you already have, first party data, which you have access to, instead of going out to third parties and trying to get all that information when you have almost a lot of things that you need to actually kickstart a lot of things or formulate those ideas. So I think that was a very good point, and definitely something I think not a lot of brands still take advantage of. We do have a couple of questions.
I'd like to add some detail to the previous one, right? So I think that challenge of really convincing stakeholders is something we deal with constantly, right? You have an idea, you're looking at what your competitors are doing, you're like, hey, we have the potential to build something like this. And like Dana mentioned, pitching to the stakeholders is very important. Very important to have a clear sense of direction, like this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3, and then really being able to estimate the amount of effort it's going to take. If you're proposing something that's very large and is going to require a huge amount of resources and a lot of time to implement, then it might make sense to have a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy where you're sort of trying to figure out the minimum viable product where you can deploy this thing that you're thinking about. And again, to Dana's point, you want to support your analyses with data. There's a lot of times when you want to plan a marketing intervention and you don't know how successful it's going to be until you actually launch a test but launching an A/B test is a resource intensive operation and you might not get approval for it. So some things that we've done in the past is using a proxy metric, right? So for instance, we want to say that if I show customers this content in an email, we expect that people are going to watch more TV, right? But how do we quantify that? Can we do some sort of back testing on historical data to see a similar intervention and then try to quantify the amount of lift we expect? So really being very quantitative about your intervention, being able to use existing data to spin up some sort of MVP will really help us, has always helped us get that buy-in. I feel very strongly about this because I think at the start of my career, I was, definitely very interested in, okay, other brands are doing this, other teams do this, can we build it too? But you have to be very aware of what constraints your organization faces and like definitely go in with all that information. Okay, Netflix might be building this, but maybe we've not built out the tech stack for this. Now, given that we have this tech stack, what is something we can build with it? So having a keen sense of what your company's capabilities are, leveraging existing data, and then being very quantitative in your pitch, I think have been great tools that have helped me.
I think those are really amazing and very useful tips for both you and Dana. Dana,
I
if
think
you
that's,
want,
yeah,
yeah,
Afshaan, I think that's brilliant what she just said. I think that's absolutely brilliant because I've actually seen companies that had capabilities in some of their tech stack, didn't know how to use them or didn't know that they were there, and proceeded to engineer the capability that they already had inside another system. So I think that statement, Afshan, is really, really true, for sure.
amazing. Well, we have a couple of questions now from attendees. If you both don't mind answering, feel free to jump in when you want, but I'll read them out. So the first one is, how can you leverage machine learning to understand searcher intent and create acquisition-based content followed by curated on-site experience? Let me know if you want me to repeat that one.
I can see that. It's a great question. I love it that you're already thinking about machine learning, right? So on the acquisition piece, you definitely have marketing acquisition channels, and then you have Google, SEO and paid search. Really being able to, use their enterprise products that allow you to see what kind of keywords people are searching for on your site. And if you're not having those kinds of relationships, if you're not able to invest in that product that Google is offering that exposes you to what keywords people are using and in what frequency they use it, then you can sort of build out something on your own search bar, right? So you want to be able to identify what users are searching for that you aren't already satisfying. One way of thinking of that could be, using an example from Hulu. If I come to Hulu and I go through a session and I just browse a lot of content and I log off, that's a signal that we have not satisfied your request right now, right? The personalization or whatever the recommender system was at that time did not meet your requirements. So that's even a step further away from that, where you don't need Google data, you don't need to architect something, but you're using some sort of data collected from failure mode. So what's a failure mode in your business? Does a user come, add products to cart and then not check out? Can you go ahead and look at those customers in greater detail, find some common characteristics of either the products they're looking at or their own browsing behavior to get some sense of who these customers are? Are they price sensitive? Is there something wrong with the product? Do you have things that are running out of stock, right? So really taking a close look to see where your failure modes are, I think will help you design machine learning models around improving those systems.
That was a great answer. And I think a lot of actionable things that people can actually implement and, start thinking about as well in terms of the personalization journey, and all about machine learning as well. We do have another question. And it is, I guess it's something, Dana, I'm not sure if you wanted to add to the machine learning one, but I think this one would be great for you because you did touch on it earlier. And Afshaan, you can jump in as well. But how can we enhance customer experience by honing in on the pre-click experience?
The free click?
Yes, pre-click.
Pre-click.
Pre-click, yeah, PRE.
Pre-click experience.
Yeah.
Well, that makes me think of something, that a study that was just done recently by Rand Fishkin's SparkToro organization. And that is well over 50% of Google searches don't result in a click anymore. And I think that's something that is really worth exploring and worth thinking about as a marketer. Whether it's Google voice search, right? So if you think about voice search, if I asked my Google Home, um, hey Google, what is charged cotton? And it's going to read me a result about Under Armour's product, charged cotton. I didn't click on anything, right? So how do you optimize your site to capture that kind of search, right? And that's definitely pre-click. It's no click, right? And I think that we're fast moving into a world where, clicks aren't the be all end all of what gets you traffic or what gets you even brand awareness. So um, I think that from an SEO perspective, just really being aware of what kinds of questions people are asking around your business and products, right? And those might surprise you, but there are a lot of your SEO team can help you find out what those questions are. And those are like questions verbatim that people are typing into Google about your products and your business. And you may find them surprising. Sometimes they're not as sexy as you would like them to be, but they're real questions that really need answered. Recently, I'll give you an example. We were doing research on some content we wanted to create around golf, the sport golf, right, and our golf products. And I did some question research and found out that people were asking all kinds of questions about Under Armour golf belts. And like, how do you do the buckle? And is it reversible? And how do you change the size? And all these, not super sexy questions, but there were a lot of them. And I went to the team. I said, we need to build some content around golf belts because people have all these questions, right? And that's really pre-click, right? When someone is typing their question into Google, they haven't clicked yet, right? So I think it's important to think about where your customers are maybe struggling or what kind of questions they have about products.
I think, yeah, that's great. I think understanding and knowing what your audience is actually searching for is something that I've noticed for a lot of clients as well. So an example for me, I guess, which really resonated with me when you mentioned around golf and types of questions which were coming up was with Volvo electric cars, where we had so many people typing in, oh, does it work in winter? How do I charge my car? Where are the ports? So you can understand and find through what people are actually searching, what are actually potential pain points or barriers as well to purchase as well. So I think a lot of that, we created like a content series similar to what you recommended for Under Armour, Dana, for them to answer those questions, even though, yes, they're definitely not sexy at all, but people have those questions and they sort of need to be answered as well, especially if they're willing to type in that sort of very specific long tail keyword as well, and that search and try to figure out what's actually happening. So as long as you can answer it, I feel like no matter how unsexy they are, it's very important. We do have one more question. And everybody else, feel free to pop in another question if you do have one, but I will kickstart with the last one. The last one is, how do you ensure you're not alienating any of your audience with your organization's personalization efforts?
So yes, I've had the unique experience of working with large organizations with large volumes of data where the challenge has always been, okay, we have a wide variety of customer profiles and we want to be able to show different things to different people, right? So for instance, we're doing personalization really at the user level, not even at the cohort level, right? Which is to say that, what you watch means that you watch something different from me, which is why you get an entirely different experience from me. But one level up from that is cohort level personalization, where you're sort of doing geo-personalized efforts. Okay, people in Florida get a different marketing message than people in Texas. So at that point, you do run the risk of extrapolating from a small population within a region and then serving the same intervention there. So if that's a huge risk that you're taking, and there's different ways of going about that, is either to make your intervention more granular so that you're able to identify pockets within certain DMAs that have differentiated experiences and you're able to really deliver on their viewing behaviors, or to just take it one step up and make it less granular, where you don't have like a wide variety of personalization efforts, but you have say like four interventions that you're serving to all of the US population, or a different intervention for US versus EMEA, and that's where you're able to generate a personalized experience for them. But with personalization, there's always the risk of assuming things about your customer that you do not know. But if you build sophisticated models, and if you build well-grounded models that are statistically significant, where the data is clean, and you know that these insights are strong, then I think you're doing a good job. And there is a potential payoff of doing personalization, and as you start to implement it in your companies, I have in my experience, I have seen that it does affect the bottom line. So I wouldn't discourage anyone from using it.
I think that's great advice. Dana, did you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think that I think we've all experienced whether it's remarketing ads or things that appeared to follow us around that creeped us out, to a certain extent. But on site, I think there's a real opportunity from a personalization / SEO sort of collaboration perspective, in that you could use AI and personalization to really optimize your internal linking structure from an SEO perspective, right? So if you understand from your data, when someone comes to a certain page, that they're very, very often also looking for these other similar types of products, and that 90% of the people coming to that page are also looking for those things, you can use your internal data to link those pages together where they may not have been before, or even to suggest what similar products or related products that people are looking for. And that can really help SEO from an internal linking perspective, as well as a customer journey. So I think eBay's done some really interesting things along those lines from an AI perspective. There's a bunch of blog posts about eBay and AI and their internal linking, which I encourage people to go look up. It's fascinating, really. They've used that, they've leveraged that technology and that approach to catapult them to the top of rankings sometimes, which is pretty magical. If I could find a way to duplicate it, I would do it in a heartbeat, for sure.
And here's another thing. You could actually alienate your audiences by not personalizing on them, right? So for instance, if I came to Under Armour and I never see a single yoga pant, you're not going to get me. I'm probably going to go back to Lululemon.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
the user's attention is very short, and they're making snap judgments about your brand, the quality, and what value they're going to get off of it. If on Hulu we don't show users what they like, they're going to assume that that's the only content we have, and they're not going to engage with our sites. And there's a number of competitors that they'll go to. So I do think you run the risk of actually alienating your customers if you don't personalize on them too. So it does behoove us to sort of think about, we don't have to personalize at the user level exactly, but you do want to think about really getting your audiences, think about like customer delight, right? When you use personalization, you're really able to allow people to make their lives easier, to really find what they're looking for. And it's a win-win for the brand and for the customer. That's why personalization works.
I think that's so true. I 100% agree. Like, there's nothing more annoying than trying to go on Home Depot site. They should already know where I live, right? They should know the closest store to me, right? We have the expectation as users that I shouldn't have to tell you even what state I'm in. You should already know that, right? Or I assume you already know that. Yeah, I think people have online searchers, they have a level of expectation that you already know some things about them, and that because of that, they won't have to work as hard, right? You'll make their lives easier that way. I think that's a really good point.
That's great. I think, yeah, even for me, I do get frustrated, even though sometimes I don't actually, sorry, Afshaan, I don't give my information to websites, but then I still get annoyed. I find that I get annoyed when, I'm looking for something and it's just so hard to find. I'm like, you should know where I live. But also, yes, I completely I get all of those frustrations and what you both have to deal with. We're nearing the end of our conversation, but we don't have any more questions, but I sort of wanted to throw it back to both you and Dana as well, just to see if you had any last words of wisdom or anything else that you wanted to either reiterate or just tell our audience about before I hand it back to Carol. No?
Dana, did you want to go first?
No, I think that continuing to collaborate, to communicate. SEO is super cross-functional, and it just touches so many different teams in so many different ways. And I think, there are definitely opportunities for AI and content creation from an SEO perspective. Oh my gosh, I think we're at the tip of the iceberg there in terms of what's possible. One of the best simplest applications I've seen for AI is in creating alt attributes for images, which is sometimes so super manual. And if you've got thousands and millions of images, how do you scale that? And AI can be a really great way to label, name, and provide alt attributes for images. So I think, that's a very simple application, I think. And I think it ranges all the way up to actually content creation, which I think we're at the tip of the iceberg there as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dana. I was gonna, that was gonna be my last plug as well, that machine learning and AI can be leveraged at every point of your business, right? From like predicting the amount of load your site is going to receive, to creating the actual content and assets that you want to leverage, from like designing marketing strategies and building automations around some of the work that marketers are doing, creatives are doing. And really, it's up to you as an organization to decide where the opportunity areas are. I would start by looking at what are the most resource intensive, what are the most expensive parts of your operation that that would help for you to automate, and what are some of these like manual processes that you find your teammates doing repeatedly that you'd like to automate. And whenever you find an opportunity like that, I would strongly recommend using AI. So like an example to Dana's point around creating image assets, like again on Wayfair, we would spend up to like $800 per image that we would have to shoot. And we were able to overturn that because, for these brands, you have to maintain a certain quality for the image that you're producing, a certain resolution. And, when you shoot a furniture setup, you have to fly in different pieces of furniture and then have a creative team, hire a professional photographer. It's a very expensive operation. And, we can use things like 3D modeling, rendering to be able to just build a single sofa and then swap out the colors. We can use, and then we've used, more advanced techniques like deep learning and GANs to be able to then artificially create them too. So there's just such a plethora of techniques out there that, but from an organization perspective, like the way you would go about approaching those opportunities is really identifying what's very manual and resource intensive and what's very expensive for you. And then really go out into the world and see where AI is being used in your industry.
Thank you. No, I think from my end, I've definitely thought about a lot of things that I haven't personally thought of before or seen actually implemented, especially around the machine learning side of things, and especially the clients within Australia as well from that perspective as well. But I know there's a lot that I have learned today from you both, and I would like to thank you both for being so open and actually, giving advice and actionable items which our audience is able to actually implement and go and think about prior to this conversation. So I'll hand it over to Carol, but yeah, big thank you to both you and Dana as well, who we still haven't gotten back, but we know you're there.
Yeah, sorry about the video. It's so strange. I didn't want to log off and then log back in because I didn't want to disrupt the flow, but thanks for hanging in there, guys.
Thank you for sticking with us.
This was really great. Sorry about the technical difficulties, Dana. That's such a bummer. But a lot of great tips, like Pre said. I personally learned a lot. Dana, would love to hear what that all attribute AI tool is that you're using. We could definitely put that to use for a lot of our clients, and I could use it personally. But just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. We hope you enjoyed the event. And if you have any more questions about personalization or SEO, feel free to reach out directly to O3 or Foresight Digital directly. So everyone have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.